jungle.
Hello, you are listening to Trump Republic Radio. It is December 6th, 2017. I'm your host, Enzo Quesada, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Bobby Hester.
Hello, everybody.
And this week we got on a special guest, since there's always, we get good feedback for our stuff about South Africa. We have on another South African, and that is Karin Smith from Free Radio South Africa.
Hi, everybody.
So, Karin, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and your background and why you're involved with advocacy for South Africans?
Well, I've been out of South Africa for 6 years. I live in Texas now because I married an American, not because I wanted to flee South Africa. I was born in Rhodesia. I'm 64 years old, so I spent half a century in Africa. I lived in Rhodesia for 5 years, and my dad was on block watch one night, got beaten to a pulp by the local insurgents, and left on our front veranda for dead. So that night, my mom gave premature birth to my youngest brother from the shock of all of this, and he was born at home. And my dad said, look, he's got 5 kids under 10. This is no place to raise children. So we packed up and left, but we were only allowed to take with us what fitted in our vehicle. So you can imagine 2 adults, 5 children, 1 a newborn, and you can take out of the country what fits in your vehicle. So we left practically destitute, and we went to what was then Southwest Africa. And we had a great life there, I must admit. But at that time, the border war was happening with Angola, where South Africa was fighting off the communists. The Cubans and the Russians were training the Rhodesian insurgents and the South African insurgents in Angola to come into those countries and create uproar in those countries. And we lived on the outskirts of town, and we were held hostage in our house for 3 days by a band of these people traveling through to South Africa. My dad once more said, look, he was a Navy man, he was a boxer, he was a strong man, but he just said, he's an adult, he can cope, but 5 children, this is no way to raise them. The psychological damage done to the kids is too severe. So one more time we packed up everything we owned and we went to South Africa. And that was in 1968. So it was just after we gained independence from Britain, and South Africa was going strong at that time. It really was. It was a beautiful country. It still is a beautiful country, but the infrastructure, nothing works in that country anymore. Nothing. And not one person in that country, apart from the high-ups, Zuma and his buddies, who is our president, the president, only he and his buddies, who are getting super rich off of corruption, are happy in that country. There are 70 million people estimated by the government, so those numbers are probably wrong, but estimated people living in that country. And I can tell you that neither the blacks nor the whites are flourishing under this ANC communist rule. Anyway, in 2008, I met my husband, who's an American, and he came to South Africa and he lived there for 2 years. But because he's white and male, he couldn't get a job. And he said, look, this is not the way a man operates, being supported by his wife. It doesn't work that way. We're going back to my country where I know I can support you as a man should. And after 2 years of absolute uphill battle to get my paperwork out of the South African government and to be accepted as an immigrant by your government, I came to the States, fully imagining that the disaster in South Africa would be covered by foreign news. Not a thing, not a word anywhere was being said about this, and I could not understand it. Now, much as I don't want to be the face or the voice of this movement, somebody had to stand up and do it. So I started contacting show hosts and saying, why are you not talking about this? And can we talk about it, please? And in the beginning, I was a facilitator. I'd put South African voices together with the show hosts, but that didn't work for very long because in South Africa, you're in danger if you stand up and speak out internationally. So people started asking, why don't I do it? Well, I didn't want to. And I was dragged into this kicking and screaming because I'm a backroom girl. I prefer to just sit there and do the work, but not be the face. And eventually I started out very small. And funnily enough, it was a black lady show host who gave us our start in America. She has a Sister Thunder Radio, amazing woman called Carla, and she just got irate about this state of affairs. And she started doing a weekly show on the situation in South Africa. And that's where I started. And then I was offered my own show on another network, and now today I do a TV show once a week on Conscious Consumer Network, and I do my own show, Radio Free South Africa, on Resolution Radio. And I've done, in the last 2 years, I've done over 700 other shows apart from my own to try and bring awareness to this. Now, I'm not a young person. I'm disabled because an illegal, I'd been here about 3 months and an illegal jumped a red light and T-boned us and damaged my spine badly. So I'm disabled. My son-in-law has cancer of the brain, and I have a family. So it is a great sacrifice to myself and my family that I do this work. But someone has to do it. Otherwise, the world won't know anything about it. And it really gets up my nose, the lies that people believe about South Africa. Now, in a way, I can understand that because Americans to me are very insular. If a thing doesn't happen in America, it's not happening. Mm-hmm. If you look at your news shows, it's America, America, America. The outside world does not exist. Unless it's a major, huge thing, like the death of St. Nelson Mandela. But we'll get to that eventually.
Yeah.
But other than that, the outside world does not exist for American news people. So to a certain extent, it doesn't surprise me that South Africa doesn't matter. But to another degree, it makes me extremely angry that the whole world stood up against apartheid, with segregation, or directly translated, separateness. It was a system of separate development. Everybody had their own country where they could live under their own king, their own tribal leaders, their own rules, their own religion, paid for by the white taxpayer. And it was a kind of a self-defense for the minority white people there to defend their own rights, to have their own place under their own rules and not be inundated by black people. So the world was fed a bunch of lies about South Africans. To this day, we are racists and neo-Nazis if you're a white South African. You must be, because you oppressed these poor black people and killed, we don't know how many million, but millions of them, which I will give you numbers on later. And it's also a downright lie. We never did any such thing. But the world was told this. And they believed it because if you're told a thing often enough, if you're told a lie often enough, it becomes truth. And if you don't have access to the other side of that, how are you supposed to make a judgment call? We didn't have internet. We didn't have alternative media. All you had was the mainstream, so everybody believed what they were. And people like Bono, excuse me, I nearly said a rude word there. I'm being very Americanized by my husband. You're rude about everything. He stood up with his lighter singing, "We won't do Sun City and we won't..." Where are those people today? Where are those self-same liberals today to stand up and say what is happening in South Africa is reverse racism and is totally wrong? And why is a minority being so victimized by the majority that they have to make 117 race-based laws, and probably more than that, race-based laws to protect the majority from the minority?
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense in anybody's mind.
They're purposely disenfranchising whites for punishment for apartheid.
Yes, but they equally, the blacks in South Africa have been misinformed and led astray by the ANC government, starting with Mandela, because there are 11 or more black tribes in South Africa. There are 11 official languages. There are chieftains and sangomas, which are witch doctors, all accepted by the government from each tribe of people. So those people have been united instead of fighting each other, which would not be good for the government. They have been united in a common hatred of the white man by the government, so that they don't fight each other, so that they continue to vote for the communist government. And it has become a bloodbath for the white people in South Africa because of that. So I'll try and calm down and stop ranting so much and go back to history, because there are some points in our history that you need to understand in order to understand the travesty of South Africa today.
Yeah.
So we'll go right back to 1652. I won't go back to the Portuguese settlers, because they didn't settle South Africa, although they went there. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company sent a man called Jan van Riebeeck to South Africa to form a refreshment base for the ships traveling around the Cape Horn to the east to trade for spices and silks and things. Because in those days it was an incredibly long trip, and the sailors were dying of scurvy because there was nowhere along the African coast where they could stop for replenishment. Now, he was firmly told that he was not there to colonize. Not under any circumstances was he there, because they didn't know what they were going to find when they got there. He was not to colonize. He was there to establish a way station only. So he brought a handful of Dutch people with him, who were mainly indentured servants, and they set up this way station for the ships. When they got to the Cape, the only people that they found living there were not black people at all. Now, most people have seen the movie Zulu or Shaka Zulu, and you think of these of a black person as this tall, noble, savage, big, strong people. The people that they found, they were nothing like that. They're under 5 foot, they're smallish people, they've got Asian features, they're more a yellow color, an orangey yellow color, and there weren't many of them either. Now, those people nowadays are referred to as the Khoisan, but in those days they were referred to as either the Hottentots, the Strandlopers, which means a beach walker, or the Bushmen. And if you've seen The Gods Must Be Crazy, those are the people, the little small people with huge backsides, because they were short of food. And so they're like a camel stores it in the hump, they store their fat in their backside. So they have these, when they were in good times, very protruding bums. And then in bad times, well, they disappeared. these were incredible people, very much like the American Indian, who believed in living in harmony with the earth. Um, the king of the Khoisan today, when I spoke to him, said, they are not owners of anything. They do not own even a patch of land. They are here as curators of the land to hand it on to the next generation in a better condition than they found it. So they never killed animals just for the sake of it or for sport. They used every part of an animal, and they believed in sharing. So if they moved in family groups, the nomadic family groups. If their little family group had killed something and they had excess, they would search for another group that didn't have and share with them. So very much spiritual people, not religious as such, but very spiritual. They would pray to the gods of the animal before they killed it and apologized for the need for killing that animal. They were nomadic. They didn't have the wheel. They didn't have horses. They didn't have any of the modern things. They didn't have a written language, although they were incredible storytellers. To this day, you will see them dancing around a campfire while they tell the stories of their past and their ancestors. It's a very interesting thing to see. But they didn't have a written language. Their language is also got nothing in common with the black languages of Africa. They speak in a series of clicks and whistles, which we as Westerners cannot get our tongues around. I mean, if you can do it, you have to contort your mouth to such a degree, because it's not it's an impossible language for us to speak. And anthropologists also say that they have nothing in common with what we call the Nguni tribes, who came from Northern Africa later on in the history of South Africa. So these people and the Dutch settlers had a very uneasy peace. They traded with the Khoi for cattle, and the Khoi, having no concept of ownership, would willingly take the beads and copper and things, and then that same night come take the cattle back from you, because after all, nobody owns anything. So I sold it to you, but so what? They're still mine. And there were a lot of run-ins. There were 100 years of clashes with the Khoi because of this misunderstanding between the two races about ownership. And the Khoi, by the whites, were treated very badly, and by the blacks were treated very badly, and by the British were treated very badly. Their whole history is one of being dispossessed people. So the reason that I've made such a meal of this Khoi story is because they are the original peoples of South Africa. And there were no blacks for us to steal land from when we arrived in South Africa. They were the Khoi, who deliberately, and will tell you to this day, they didn't own the land because nobody owns the land. So, many adventures later, the French Huguenots arrived from Europe, where they were being the Spanish Inquisition was going on. Their religion was not accepted, and they fled for their very lives. And they arrived in the Cape, and they brought a certain elegance to life in the Cape, because these were rough and tough men. Very little women were brought by the Dutch East India Company. So the men were interbreeding with the Khoi, which formed a group of people today called the Coloureds in South Africa. They call themselves that. It's not an insult. They are the Cape Coloureds, and they're very proud of it. A language was developed, which is now today called Afrikaans. It was a mixture of Dutch and a whole mishmash of languages in order to be able to communicate with the Khoisan. So the French Huguenots arrived, bringing with them a touch of elegance, and also the grapevines, which they smuggled in from Europe and started planting the first vineyards in South Africa, which today still produce the finest wine in the world. We win prizes every year for great wines, and that's how far back that goes. Now, the indentured servants from the Dutch East India Company eventually bought their way out of servantship, and they were given plots of land where they could then start their own farm. But the problem with that is that whatever produce they produced had to be sold only to the Dutch East India Company at prices set by the Dutch East India Company. There was no free market trading whatsoever. And a Boer, which is directly translates as a farmer, a Boer is a very stubborn animal. They are incredibly resilient people, hardworking people, but hard-headed. My goodness, nothing through history has changed. 400 years later, they are still the same breed of people.
And independent.
Incredibly independent. They do not want to tell anybody what to do, but by the same yardstick, they do not want to be told what to do. So they are very Calvinistic people. They believe that they are one of the lost tribes of Israel. And God features in every moment of their lives. So this decadence that was brought with the French Huguenots and the British, because the Cape changed hands a number of times. During the Napoleonic Wars, it was given over to the British, then given back to the Dutch, then given back to the British again. So it changed hands a number of times. And these stubborn Boers did not like the decadence of ladies stepping out of carriages and showing their ankles. I mean, for heaven's sake, you don't do stuff like that. And dancing, no, man. This kind of thing was just not acceptable to their rigid religious way of life. Plus taxation without representation, plus a number of other things. So eventually, 125 years after they landed at the Cape, these Boers decided they've had enough of this way of life, and they are going to get in their wagons and trek into the interior and find a place that is not tainted by this liberal lifestyle, which they did in family groups. So the same as they did here in the US. In fact, practically the same kind of wagons they had, only ours were pulled always by oxen. They were called ox wagons. Yours were sometimes pulled by horses, but ours were all oxen. They formed groups and set off into the great unknown. Now you must understand, no white had ever set foot in this country. So it was totally unknown, uncharted territory, and off they went. And South Africa has got incredibly harsh weather conditions, very harsh, very dry. And these people set off with all their worldly goods packed into their wagon, and off they went. Now, after many trials and hardships and up and downs and things, they, with some of their Khoi servants, met up at the Fish River with the first blacks either group had ever set eyes on. And they were all shocked. The blacks were equally shocked, because here were these white wizards with the wheel and horses and writing and rifles. And they were stunned at the sight of these people. Now, the black story at this stage is that from North Africa, they were sweeping south in search of new grazing lands for their cattle. And on the way, it is estimated that it is called the Mafakani or the Defakani. On the way, it is estimated that they wiped out 2 million black people, because these marauding blacks coming south, any tribe in their way, they would take the women, enslave the kids, steal the cattle, burn the land, kill the men. And they did not have a name. They were not a homogeneous group, a tribe at that stage. They were just a mass of blacks coming south. So they had committed the biggest genocide of people in history at that stage. They killed 2 million of their own people on their way south. So now these two lots meet up at the Fish River. Shock, horror, dismay on both sides, and then the trouble started. So there were many, many fights. Same as the Cowboys and Indians here, we had the Boer and the blacks there. Except that the blacks were more in number. I don't think, you can correct me if I'm wrong about American history, but I don't think that the Indians came in tribes of tens of thousands, whereas the blacks did. So there were many of them facing these little isolated parties of trekkers. And after many, 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 many battles with the blacks, the Boers decided that they wanted this piece of land in Natal. And as a matter of courtesy, they would go to the local tribal leader. By this time, the black tribes had coalesced into a tribe called the Zulus. Now, they are still the most numerous black tribe in South Africa. Very strong group of people. And the whites decided that in order to keep the peace, and as a matter of courtesy, they would go to this king and inform him that they wanted to be peaceful neighbors and were willing to pay for the rights to some land, which was not owned by the king, by the way, but in order to do things correctly, they would go and speak to him and make a treaty, a peace treaty, and get this piece of land where they wanted to set up a community. So they went to the king, King Dingon, and they told him what they wanted. And he said, listen, boys, this opposing king has stolen all my cattle. So what I would like you to do, as a gesture of good faith, is you go round up those cattle, sort out the king for me, bring the cattle back to me, and we'll talk business. Which Pitratif and his fellows, they went and did this. And when they got back, the king said, now what about the horses? And they said, no, man, this was not part of the deal. No horses were mentioned. Go fetch the horses. So they did this. And they came back, and the king said, good chaps, what we're going to do is we're going to have a nice big party tonight, and we'll sign this treaty, and we'll be buddies forevermore. So they had this party, and just after the treaty was signed, which exists to this day, it's written on a piece of parchment, and it has the king's thumbprint on it. Just as they were all finalizing these things, the king shouted out, Bulala Tugati, and his impis, which means kill the white wizard. His impis, which are the warriors, stood up from behind the crowds and tortured this group of white people. They eventually took them to the killing grounds and killed them all. And then swept out of the camp to where the men had left their women and children, found any other trekking party they could find and slaughtered them as well. So the white Boers' attempts to do this the correct way with an African king were pretty fruitless. So, okay, there's a lot more history, but I'm not going to go into all of it. I just want to do the main points here so that people see where we're at today. Then the British had taken over Natal, which is a beautiful part of South Africa. It is a stunning, stunning piece of South Africa. You drop an apple pip and a tree will grow. It's subtropical. There's warm water flowing down the coast. The sea is like bath water there. The Mozambique current comes down there. Everything grows. It's green and lush and beautiful. Mountains, everything. Today that is called Zululand. During the apartheid reign, that land was given to the Zulus as their part of South Africa. And it's still today Zululand, ruled by the Zulu king, and his tribe claim it as their own. Anyway, the British had taken over Natal, and the Boers trekked inland again, and they formed two Boer republics, the Free State and the Republic of Transvaal. Two little Boer republics acknowledged by the rest of the world as countries, and things went on quite nicely because they didn't have a real government. They were kind of people loosely in charge, but they were rural communities who only went to town to trade. They weren't interested in cities and those kind of things. Unfortunately, gold was found in one area in the Free State, and in the Transvaal, and diamonds were found in the Free State. Now, this was at the height of British colonialism. So the Britain was fairly broke because they were widespread. There were wars going on everywhere, and they needed money. So up until this point, they had largely ignored these two Boer colonies because they were small, they were insignificant, they didn't matter. But now money was involved, and big money. So they said to the Free State Republic, oh, we want those diamonds. And the Boers sat and thought about it for a while and said, you know what? Those diamond mines are on the outskirts of our colony. We don't care. You can have them. But the Transvaal, the gold was in the very center of their country in Johannesburg. So you can hardly cut out the center of the country and give it away. So there was a bit of a to and froing about this thing, but they were prepared to give the British the gold. You know, give it to them, but not give them the land that it was in. And the Brits decided, no, this is not good enough. We are going to go to war, and we want both these countries, and we're going to make them our own because there could be other riches there, and we're going to have it. So the two Boer Wars happened. The first Boer War was of short duration and not terribly important. The second Boer War was what has caused a rift in South Africa between English and Afrikaans-speaking people to this day. The British was so determined to take these two little republics that they brought in 450,000 British troops from Britain. Now, in those days, it was 6 months trip in a ship to come to South Africa, but it was worth it to them to get these riches. And they brought in these troops, and they declared war on these two little republics. Well, I think they kind of thought from their colonizing efforts in the rest of the world that they were far more powerful than they actually were. And they chose a sorry day to mix with the Boers. Now, the Boers did not have a standing army, and these people were not conscripted. They were told, if you're a patriot, son, you will get on your horse, bring 7 days' supplies, bring your rifle, and come serve your people. But you can go home to harvest the crops. You can go visit your wife, but you come and serve your people. So they did. And they didn't have uniforms. They didn't get paid. In those days it was you take the king's shilling. They didn't get a shilling to take. They were there for patriotic purposes and didn't get paid for it. And off they went to war. Now the Brits, in all their might, they still used their way of marching to war with their red jackets and their white pants and their little drummer boy in the front, and off they'd go with this cloud of dust behind them. And their supply lines were incredibly stretched because today it is an 8-hour drive from Natal to the Transvaal. So in those days, imagine it, you're walking it with the drummer beating the tune the whole way. So it was a very stretched out supply line. And the Boers took advantage of this because they were in little bands and they were in their mostly skin jackets, etc., so they blended in with the felt. And they would run out, jump out from behind a hill on their little Boer ponies, attack the supply line and disappear before the Brits could even react, So these were the first guerrilla tactics that the world knew about, and these people excelled in it. And they just kept it up, and they could have kept going forever using those tactics. But the Brits came to the realization that where they had to bring their supplies in carts, the Boers didn't have that drawback. Every single farmhouse was a supply route for them. They could go to any farmhouse, get supplies, have a night's sleep, get a fresh horse, and go again in the morning. Oh, sorry about that. And the British, when they got wise to this, instituted their scorched earth policy. And they would then burn down the farmhouse, burn the lands, salt the lands, poison the water, and send the women, children, and elderly to concentration camps. So it hurt the Boers in two ways. Their supply lines were cut, and the reason they were fighting in the first place was taken away from them, because they were fighting for their folk and fatherland, their people and their homeland, their wives, children, and their farms. Now, if those didn't exist anymore, what the hell were they fighting for? And 25% of the Boer population died in tragic circumstances in those camps. They died of dysentery, of cholera, of starvation. The pictures from those days are horrific. In my lifetime, we had the Biafran crisis where they starved, and you saw these terrible pictures of skeletal people walking around. Well, that was the Boer concentration camps. And the Boers were not beaten militarily in that fight. They were beaten because their people were being starved to death, literally. So they gave up. And we became a British colony. So, the British, in the 1900s, the British then instituted apartheid. It was their laws that created apartheid. They instituted the No Cross-Barrier Mixed Marriages Act. They created the no land to be sold to black people. They created the original homelands. They brought in the apartheid laws. In 1913, there was the Glenn Gray Act, which was no land to be sold to blacks whatsoever. They cannot own land. So it was the British who instituted apartheid in the early 1900s in South Africa. Now, in 1948, for the first time ever, the Boers won a political victory, and they became the political ruling party of South Africa, the Nationalist Party. They still were a colony of Britain, so they operated under British law, but the country was run for the first time by Boers. So you have to understand that British law still prevailed, that they did not make these laws up. They did not do the apartheid thing. It was the British, and we only got freedom from the British in 1962, by which time apartheid was in full swing. And what the Brits in their wisdom did was they formed the Union of South Africa. So they took all these disparate black homelands, plus the two little white colonies, plus the Cape, and they pushed them all into borders designed by themselves and said, now you guys will all live happily ever after, because this is what we want. Now, whites were never a majority in South Africa. As far as I can make out, there's never been more than 6 million whites in South Africa at all. So they've never been a majority there. And given the size of the country, which is 1.5 times the size of Texas, they did not have enough people to perform the manual labor that needed doing. And blacks were pouring in from all over Africa because they wanted a piece of this economic success. During the apartheid years, which lasted from 1948 until about 1988, so about 40 years, the black population of South Africa grew by 920%. Now you tell me, as a human being, if apartheid was so wicked, if we were slaughtering them by their millions, how did they come to have such huge numbers during that period?
But they tell us all about the black genocide, so that must have been what happened.
Yeah, I know it must have happened. So let me tell you another little figure that I'll throw in here. During those apartheid years, there were 700 murders per year in South Africa. 700, mainly black on black. To this day, you will struggle to find a white on black murder in South Africa. To this day, when that number has increased to, by government figures, 52 murders a day, by Interpol figures, 100 murders a day in that country. Imagine that in Texas. Can you just imagine 100 murders a day happening in Texas? One rape every 17 minutes.
People would be talking about it, across the country. This would be the biggest thing.
Exactly, but the world is just saying it's not happening. It's not happening. The Rainbow Nation's wonderful because Saint Mandela did this. Anyway, so these are facts because the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, headed by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a most left-leaning man, could never exist more than that. He headed this, and these numbers came from them. And this commission was designed to punish white perpetrators of atrocities during the apartheid years. And their numbers tell you that there were 700 murders a year committed by blacks, mainly on blacks. So, that number of murders happens in a week now in South Africa. In 1 week. And mostly black on black still. So it's a lie. The stuff that you have been told about us, neo-Nazi, racist, murderous, hatred, monsters with dripping fangs, is a lie. And you can look it up anywhere you like. Do your research. You will see that every word I've told you can be backed up by 100 other sources because it's lies. What you have been fed and told about us is not true. Yes, there were bad things happen during apartheid. But in any group of people, you are going to have those bad apples who commit bad acts. And if you give a person enough power, most people use it incorrectly or will at some stage overstep the bounds. And even a decent person pushed hard enough and with enough power will use it incorrectly. You look at this country today, you look at what's coming out about Congress today, and you realize that power makes people corrupt. And people in those days were no different. They were just people. So yes, terrible things were done during the apartheid era, and I don't try and hide that, because what I'm interested in is telling people the truth about South Africa. So we did bad things. There were bad things done by bad people. And that's life.
But at the same time, during apartheid, South Africa had an immigration crisis. So many people were coming into a place that was supposedly oppressive.
Yes, exactly. 920% increase in black population. Were they coming there because they thought they were going to be murdered? Just look at your immigration here now. This is a good thing. If you look at just the threat of being sent back and being arrested for being here illegally, which hasn't happened in the last 8 years, the numbers have dropped horrifically. They're down to the lowest numbers in 40 years trying to cross your borders now. because they are being told you can't do that. Okay? So if we had been murdering blacks by the thousands, would they have wanted to come?
No.
No.
Of course
No.
not.
You're not going to go somewhere where they're going to murder you and your kids. So, people just have to look at this logically. So, okay, yes, Verwoerd tried to, President Verwoerd tried to bring in a thing called a grand apartheid. And we did establish homelands for every single separate tribe. We did do that. But it was A, for their own benefits, and B, for self-defense of the small white race that was living there. Because after all, we were the taxpayers paying for all of this. We also needed some defense system for us. So they got their own homelands. The Zulus got Zululand, the Vendors got Venderland, the Swanas got Botswana, the Swazis got Swaziland, etc., etc. Everybody had their own piece of land, ruled by their own king, with their own witch doctors and their own language and their own everything. And they were allowed to come into the white areas to work. And they had to carry a passport, which was an ID document, at all times. If you did not have it on you, you would be arrested. And we had white by night. If you were a black person in a white area by night, and the police saw you, and you could not explain to their satisfaction what the hell you were doing there, you went to jail. But in defense of that process, whites also carried an ID book. And God help you if you didn't have it on you. You had an ID book, and in it was your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, your gun license, your driver's license. Everything about you was in that. And if you changed address, you had to send in a change of address slip and get it changed in your book. So both races had to carry not the identical document, but they had to carry it. So it's not like we were oppressing them or forcing something on them that we didn't have to do ourselves. When you were 16, you got your ID book. It was a way of life, simple as that. Anyway, there were uprisings now because they didn't like this, what they called the Dom Pass, which translates as a stupid pass. And the same as in the 60s, we had Burn the Bra, they had these Burn the Dom Pass things. And it was very silly of them because without one, you'd be arrested. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they did this. And the other uprisings were about the fact that they didn't like being taught in Afrikaans. They wanted to be taught in their own languages. Now, they had no written language. So there were no books in their language. They don't have words for scientific or mathematic or those kind of concepts. They don't have words for them. So the probability of being able to teach them in their own language was far from realistic. And those two things were the main causes of the uprisings in South Africa in the 70s, which caused the world to turn on us and put sanctions against us and generally try and make our lives miserable. Now, at the same time that we had those civil unrest inside of South Africa, we had the war against the communists, which we call the Rooigevaar, the Red Danger, on the Angolan border. So every single boy in South Africa, when he left high school, was conscripted and had to go and do a 2 or 3 year stint in the army. And when he came back, he was then had to go to the army for 2 or 3 months a year, every year, until he was no longer needed. So all three of my brothers, my father, my cousins, everybody went to fight the communists on the border. Now, our boys were blown up. You've seen the results of Iraq, Afghanistan. Our boys came back in that self-same situation with their legs missing, etc., etc. And they fought a very long, hard war on our borders, while the remaining people were fighting civil unrest inside our borders. Now this is where we come to Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, this heroic saint who deserves statues and things all over the world and whose worship as his shrine, was nothing more than a disgusting, traitorous terrorist. And the world has been misled about this man as well. If we were so oppressing blacks in South Africa, how did he get a lawyer's degree in a South African university built especially for blacks, paid for by white taxpayer money? How did Mahatma Gandhi become a lawyer in South Africa under the same circumstances? Because we didn't educate them? Because we oppressed them? Because we murdered them? No, no. To this day, a poor, a white South African, if you have a servant, they become part of your family. The Boer nation are very paternalistic. The man has the final word in everything because that's God's word says that. And the women say yes, sir, to the husband. Not that it happens all the time. We know who rules most houses. But in theory, that is how it is. And everybody defers to the head of the family, who is the husband appointed by God as the head of his family. Right. So as the head of the family, he has a duty to everybody. So his staff members become family members. Because in South Africa, if you have a maid, for instance, the maid lives on the premises in her maid's room. So she has a room with a kitchen and a bathroom. You provide her uniform. She eats the same food as the family. She washes, everything gets done in the family washing machine. She uses cleaning equipment of the family. The family normally helps send her kids to school, help with medical expenses, etc., etc. All cost of clothing goes to them. It is a family member who is taken care of the same as any member of your family. On the farms, the farmers who've had the farms for centuries, the same workers have worked on that farm through the centuries. So if your father worked for this farmer, you do as well. They're part of the family. They live on the farm. They have their own place where they live. They get their electricity, water, salary, food, uniforms, trips to town, to the doctor, generally a farm school for the children. Those things are provided as a matter of course by a South African farmer for his staff, because that is how the Afrikaner nation are. It just is that way. So these poor oppressed people, okay. Nelson Mandela, he decided that this oppressive apartheid system had to end. His people were being treated abominably, and something had to be done about it. And he formed the armed wing of the ANC, which is called Umkhonto Sizwe, which means the spear of the nation. He formed the armed wing of that. Our present president, President Zuma, was in intelligence gathering in MK, and they were the people who were being trained by the Cubans and the Russians on our borders. They were the people that we were fighting on our borders while fighting Mandela and his cronies inside our borders. A lot of them were sent to university in Russia, where they were trained. I can't, it slipped my mind the name of that. It's an African name, university in Russia where they were sent. They were trained and then brought back to do civil warfare inside our country. So we were struggling with all of this, and then sanctions were instituted against us at the same time. Now in South Africa we have everything, absolutely everything except oil. We have found small reserves recently off the coast, but at that time we did not have oil. You cannot conduct a long distance war and an internal war without petrol. And at the same time, Rhodesia was going through its civil war, and they had sanctions against them. So we were supplying them with everything because they're landlocked. And it was very hard to break sanctions against Rhodesia. So we were supplying them, helping them, and supplying our boys to their army and etc. And it became very difficult for us, although we had invented Sasol, which is a huge company that makes petrol out of coal. Now we have abundant coal in South Africa, and a South African invented this method of extracting fuel, car fuel, from coal. But it is a very intensive, slow process, and we could never supply enough for our entire country to use. At the same time, we were cut off from sports with the rest of the world, technology from the rest of the world, trade with the rest of the world. Your musicians wouldn't have anything to do with us. So we were very isolated. It amazes me today to speak to Americans and they say, do you remember that music from that year? And I'm like,
no transfer over.
Yeah.
It wasn't allowed. We didn't have it because it wasn't allowed. Plus, our government being so godly, many things were banned for the whites. We had huge banned reading lists. We had huge banned music. We had, because it was ungodly and not for the people of South Africa. So apart from the sanctions, which stopped us having access to these things, we got TV in 1972. That was the first TVs in South Africa, because it was ungodly, and it would introduce who knows what to the people of South Africa, and our government wasn't having any part of it. So we were, in a lot of ways, protected from the things that were going on in the world at that time, the hippie movement of free sex and drugs and rock and roll. We obviously did not have that to any great extent. We were protected from the beginnings of rap music and all those kind of things because we couldn't have them. So we lived a very isolated but very clean. We weren't exposed to the rot that was setting in the outside world.
Yeah.
And we were forced to our own devices to make things that the world wouldn't let us have. So we did the petrol from coal. We developed the most incredible arms industry, where the very people who were sanctioning us were trying to find a way around it, so they could buy our aircraft and our helicopters and our, the French and the Israelis were trying desperately to find a way to buy our arms because they were the best in the world. We had a wonderful army. We had a fully functioning, perfectly clean, great country. For instance, no shops were allowed to open on a Sunday. You could not trade on a Sunday in South Africa. Bottle stores were not open. We never had 24/7 stores. It was a very well-regulated, clean, not being incredibly religious myself, I use this word godly a lot, but it applies to that nation so much that you can't not use it. And if it didn't come from God, then you were not having it, and that was best for the populace, end of story. So into this comes Mandela and his cronies, and they are going to change this country because the blacks deserve to own the country. They don't have a vote, and they deserve a vote, and they deserve a whole bunch of stuff, and we're going to bring this country to its knees, and the blacks are going to take over. So, Mandela and his bombings. Mandela was responsible for a list longer than my arm of bombings of police stations, railway stations, restaurants. He killed dozens of innocent white civilians, of which my aunt, who was pregnant at the time, was one. I remember scrabbling through the rubble of the restaurant to try and find her when that bomb went off in Durban. And we were stunned to our core because we didn't know that these kind of things were happening outside of South Africa. We were isolated. So when these things started in our country, we were horrified. It was beyond understanding how this could happen. And of course, the uprisings then about the schools teaching in Afrikaans and the attacking of police stations, things got out of hand because our police force was tiny. The masses were masses. And we were outnumbered, not outgunned, but we were outnumbered badly. So before the famous Soweto riots, the Sharpeville riots, they had a week before that attacked a police station and killed 9 policemen. So the police were on high alert and very nervous about where the next attack was coming. And the Sharpeville riots started. Now what they did was they put the women and children in front of these hordes of screaming, shouting, burning things down people. And so we will never know who fired the first shot, whether it was them or whether it was the police. Nobody knows for sure. But that first shot was fired, which led to disaster. And then came that iconic picture of that black guy carrying this dead, limp body, child's body, through the gunfire smoke. And that picture hit the world like a hammer blow. And that has come to represent to the world what white South Africans are about. They didn't tell you what led up to that. They didn't tell any of that. It was just these terrible white people murdering white children, black children. Okay, so Mandela, when he went to court, he had 154 charges of treason, sedition, murder against him. He did not contest 150 of them. They were just, okay, yes, I did that. And he asked Amnesty International, which is a US-based, very, very, very left-leaning organization, to please come to his defense during this trial. And they said they could not do that because this man was as guilty as sin. The trial was perfectly fair, and they can't defend him. Sorry, we wash our hands of you. Now, this is my opinion, the biggest mistake that the South African government made was deciding that they were not going to make a martyr of Mandela and his cronies who were in court together. They were going to send them to jail for life, which effectively made martyrs of them. In any other country, those people would have been hanged because hanging was a thing then, and it was a hanging. Treason is a hanging offense. Sedition is a hanging offense. Trying to overthrow your government, hanging offense. So you put the whole lot together. That man in any other country with his buddies would have hung by the neck until dead. But because of the scrutiny of the outside world and the situation we were in at the time, they decided they weren't going to do that. So they put him in jail. You have aired the whole world has seen pictures of this terrible little jail cell on Robben Island where this kind, sweet man was in prison for 27 years. Also not true. Yes, he was in prison there for 17 years. Yes, he did have hard labor. But yes, he also wrote a book called How to Be a Good Communist while he was in there. And he also orchestrated bombings on the general public while he was in there. And he communicated with his wife, Winnie Mandela, who invented necklacing, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah.
So for 17 years, yes, he was there. And then the president of South Africa went to him and said, listen, Mr. Mandela, we will give you unconditional freedom. All you have to do is renounce violence. And he said, I will not. So they said, okay, right, then in jail you stay. But we are going to move you to the mainland, to Pollsmoor Prison, which is not such high security prison, and you make your life a little easier. Well, from that prison cell, he then got a cottage on the grounds of the prison. A 4-bedroom house with a swimming pool, a pool room, a valet, a chef, a personal secretary. He had visitors from all over the world, which he entertained there. His prison cell. I can tell you most people in the world today would love to have that life. in or out of prison.
Yeah, sounds pretty good.
In or out of prison. Thank you very much. I'll take it. So this poor, dear man who refused to renounce violence, wrote How to Be a Good Communist, and was married to Winnie Mandela. Now, Winnie Mandela, during his time in prison, carried on his good works outside of prison. She was arrested a number of times, but she mainly maintained her freedom. Now, she had this group called her football club, the Mandela Football Club, which had nothing to do with football whatsoever. They were a group of young, disaffected black people who carried out her retaliation campaign against anyone that she didn't like. But unfortunately for one of them, his name was Stompie. I can't pronounce his surname. I've never been able to. It was Masasela or some, anyway, Stompie. He did something or didn't do something that she got very angry about. And she said, there's no punishment available right now that meets the sin that this man has done against me, so I'm going to invent one. And she invented necklacing, especially for Stompie. And now necklacing is they tie your arms by your sides with barbed wire, they tie your feet together with barbed wire, they put a car tire over you, fill it with gas, and set it alight. And then they dance and sing and shout rude words at you while you burn to death. Now, that method is used to this very day in xenophobic outbreaks in South Africa. If you really don't like your black neighbor, you go and necklace him. To my knowledge, and I may be wrong, that I have never heard of this being used on white people. We can talk about what is used on white people, but as far as I know, this method has never been used on a white person. But Winnie Mandela infamously said, with our necklaces and our matches, we will win back this country. She is referred to as the mother of the nation. Well, if she was my mother, I wouldn't want to know her, quite honestly, but she's today the mother of the nation and revered almost as much as Lord Saint Nelson is.
It's crazy that, the world refers to Nelson Mandela as a saint, and he's married to such a woman who can come up with such a horrific way to kill people.
Yeah, well, he divorced her shortly after he came out of prison and married Grace, who was the wife of the president of Mozambique. I don't know if they ever really got married, but anyway, he lived out the rest of his days with Grace. But to the day he died, he never renounced violence. When the world came for his coronation as saint, when he became president in 1994, and everyone, the dignitaries around the world came, in front of them and in front of the international press, to great cheers from all, he sang Kill the Boer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
On that day, in front of presidents, kings, and the world press, he sang Kill the Boer, and they cheered him on because they didn't know what he was singing. I will allow that. They did not know what he was singing. But, so from that very first day, the incitement to murder and genocide of the whites began. On that first day, and the way that we were sold down the river was like this. In 1992, they had already dismantled apartheid to a great degree and were negotiating with the ANC. So the whites, who were the only voters in South Africa, were asked to have a referendum on this question. Shall we continue to negotiate with the ANC towards power sharing and a peaceful future? The whites have been battle weary and just shell shocked from what had been going on in our country, overwhelmingly voted yes. Power sharing and negotiations was what we voted yes for. In 2 years' time, before we could blink our eyes, ship, white South Africa's gone, belongs to the communist government, Mandela's our president, we have no voice in parliament. We were sold down the bloody river by our politicians, by the US and by the UK. We were sold down the river. and maligned along the way and made you feel guilty because we were alive. So, okay, we get this government in, and amongst the first things that they do is they disarm the public. Now, under the Nationalist Party, you had to have a firearm license because we didn't want blacks owning firearms. So you had to have a license. You'd go into the store, you choose your firearm, you pay for it, put in your license application. You'd go to the store, they'd phone you, say, it's here, go get your gun. Fine. So the government had this entire database of who lived where, which firearms you owned, and the ANC inherited this. Mm-hmm. So they said, ha, fellows, we don't think it's a good idea that you have these firearms. What we're going to do is give you X amount of time. You're going to go to your local police station who have a list of your names and what you own. You're going to hand in your firearms, reapply for a new license under the new government. When you get your license, we'll give you your firearms back. Yay. So South Africans thinking, well, white South Africans are very law-abiding, and they've always believed that the government, they don't believe it so much today, but they've always believed the government had their best interests at heart. So, okay, we'll go do this, and we'll apply for a new license, no problem. Most people are still waiting for that license. And those firearms have been sold on the black market, out of police strong rooms, lock-up rooms, sold, given away, stolen, or are hired out by the day. For $5 a day, you can hire a firearm in South Africa from your police department to go and kill a white person. So, okay, so we handed in our firearms. There were people, obviously, who had inherited guns, so they were not particularly on a record anywhere. There are people who kept them, some of them, but in the main, you couldn't. They had your name, address, and what you owned. So how did you possibly refuse to hand them in? There were people, as I say, who maintained their firearms, which was damn smart of them. So the next thing that they decided to do was, we had a thing called the Commandos, which is like a kind of militia group, and they protected the farms. Because of the harsh farming conditions in South Africa, you have to have a really, really big farm to herd cattle or to grow anything, because it's just a harsh climate. So the grass dies. We go through cycles of 7-year rain and 7-year drought. So it's either flooding or it's drought. So you need a very big area to be able to commercially farm. And so we had a commando system which was made up of volunteers, which protected the farms because they were so far outlying places and so big. And the ANC government disbanded this lot, promising that they would do extra policing and form a unit to look after the farmers. Of course, that never happened.
Yeah.
That never happened. And what that has led to is 4,000 farmers being brutally, horrifically tortured to death. Now, a murder in the States is usually an opportunistic thing. It's either a family affair, murder of passion, or a drive-by shooting. It is not a 3-day event where you are tortured systematically, raped with sharpened broomsticks, raped with broken bottles, burnt with boiling water, burnt with hot irons, drilled with an electric drill through your arms and legs, the husband's eyelids cut off so that he cannot refuse.
Yeah, I've seen some of the photos of it.
It is absolutely, unbelievably inhumane what they have done to the white people of South Africa. It is inhumane. Now, when they started, there were 125,000 commercial farms in South Africa. Today, there are 30,000. And of those, 20,000 are on the market in a desperate bid to sell them before this law gets out of the court saying that you can take the property without compensation. So, in 22 years of ANC rule, 4,000 farmers have been murdered, tortured to death, and 85,000 white people, other than farmers, have been tortured to death in the same barbaric manner.
Yeah, I have some statistics Simon Roach has actually given me through his presentations he's done here. White South African murdered by blacks versus Americans murdered since 1994. It's 13.7 times the American murder rate towards white South Africans. So, like, if you can imagine that, you know, any sort of group in the United States, people that are wearing blue hats, if they were being murdered at this rate, people would be talking about this. But it's not happening.
No. People don't seem to care. So, okay, now we need to go to the next move of this illustrious government of ours. They decided that affirmative action would be the way to go. Now, the whites generally agreed with them that this was only fair because under the apartheid government, there was job reservation for white people. So if you weren't highly educated, you would still get a job. There would be a job for you. You could go and work on the railways, or you could sweep the store, or whatever. So that white unemployment was literally unheard of. The blacks did manual labor because most of them were uneducated and therefore could not be business managers or economists or rocket scientists. They did the labor in the mines, the gardens, the houses, swept the streets, those things. I'm generalizing because there obviously were educated black people, but those people rose above their station, even with the white government. I mean, Mandela was a lawyer with his own practice, so you can see that they were not totally oppressed so that the whites could rise above them. Yeah. But we thought that it's only fair, but there was no sunset clause to this, number one. And number two, because the government decided, no man, this is not working fast enough, we're going to have to do something else. So they brought in black economic empowerment, which is today broad-based black economic empowerment. And that is a terrible, terrible thing. It means that your company staff has to match the demographics of the country, which is 80% black, a small percentage Indian, a small percentage colored, and a 2% white. So in any business, you can only have 2% white employees. Now that turned the world upside down because the top management, everybody was white, but they had to be gotten rid of and replaced by unqualified blacks, no matter who, replaced by these blacks because that's what the law requires. Now, you have to also understand that most big industry in South Africa, like the electricity supply, the telephones, the media, the mines, is either statal or parastatal. So it either belongs to the state or it's half belongs to the state. So if you want to do big business in South Africa, you have to do it with the government. And if you're not BBBEE compliant, then you cannot do business with the government. And you get a monthly scorecard that scores you on a number of points. And if you don't pass, no government business for you. But it's not just you. It's your suppliers as well. So if I print books and you supply the ink, you have to be compliant as well. And if you supply the paper, you too must be compliant. And if I can't prove that, I can't print school books. And I can't have a government contract printing anything. So this became a terrible thing, and people in their masses lost their jobs. And white people. And that's well and good. So you lose your job, and your kids are at a good school, you have a decent home, you have 2 cars on whatever you call it here, HP hire purchase in South Africa, and you have some money in the bank. Maybe you have a holiday home. So you sell your holiday home, your cars are repossessed, your house is repossessed, your kids can't go to school. What do you do and where do you go? So families started vacating their servants' quarters and putting Granny and Grandpa in the servants' quarters so that they had a home to go to. But the government said, no backyard dwelling for whites, forget. Can't do that. So now you can't even have your own family living with you to keep them off the streets. So the white people, they started popping up on street corners with a piece of cardboard with no job, family to feed, no money, please help. And on every corner you would find these people. It has gotten so bad that we estimate, because once more figures out of South Africa are impossible to come by, the government doesn't allow it, we estimate that a third of the white population of South Africa is living in those conditions. No hope of ever getting another job. Their kids cannot go to school because, not like here, where you get on the school bus and you go to school free. You have to transport yourself to school. You have to wear a uniform. You have to pay for your books, and you have to pay school fees. So if you don't have a roof over your head and you don't know how you're going to feed your kids, how do you do that?
You don't.
So we have an entire generation growing up uneducated. An entire white generation.
By government policy.
By government policy. So I'm going to tell you about a squatter camp, because this is government policy, and this is what this government thinks is good for whites. The whites started getting together, congregating in informal settlements where they at least had a certain false security in numbers, and helping each other out. And there was a certain abandoned caravan park in South Africa called Coronation Park, where a group of white people, 300 of them, had gotten together, planted vegetable gardens, started some cottage industries to make money. And they had been living there for a very long time. They were fairly settled. It wasn't ideal circumstances, but at least it was better than being on the streets. And the government decided one day they need this piece of land. This particular piece of land. For what, nobody knows, but they need it. So they sent the Red Ants in, which is a government-sponsored group of thugs who dispossess you, evict you. They're the government's eviction arm. They sent them into Coronation Park to evict these people. Now, Sunette Bridges is a South African singer and an incredible activist for white South Africans. And she took this thing to court. And the court case lasted 7 years, but the government won. Unfortunately, they had shot themselves in the foot in the meantime. Because in South Africa, if a squatter moves into a house, say you're on vacation, and some black family move into your house while you're gone, if they've been there more than 24 hours, you cannot evict them. You have to go to court to evict these people from your own home, and in the meantime, you can't live there.
It's insane.
And the court case can cost you tens of thousands and last for years. In the meantime, they trash your house by moving in all their relatives and friends and things, and you've got nowhere to live. So they had written a law saying that if you evict somebody from your premises, you have to find them a place to live, which in this case shot the government in the foot, because they were evicting these people from their homes and had to find them a place to live. So they did. They did, on top of a garbage heap that had recently been decommissioned, had not been changed in any way, so there was no ground cover, no compacting of it, no nothing. They went and put up corrugated iron houses on this garbage heap with no floors, no windows, 4 walls, a tin roof, and a door. No foundations, nothing. And they said to these people, three faucets with running water for 300 people. No toilets, no indoor plumbing. These houses had one room on this garbage ground, and no windows, nothing. That's now where the whites must live. Across the road from this squatter camp is a black squatter camp. built by the government, RDP housing. These houses are built of brick. They have 3 rooms. They have indoor plumbing. They have heating. They have electricity. They have TV aerials. They have garages built on carports or garages. And across the road is this garbage heap called Munseyville, where the whites are now sent to live by the government. So the people move in, and you have aged grannies on a mattress, on this, including babies and whatever. Now they move in there. The first night they were there was an incredible storm. And the roofs just leaked buckets. Some of the houses blew away. They were found 2 blocks away because they had no foundations. So the people living there were literally hip deep in this floating, well, you know what's in garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were hip deep in this. And this is where Lee Oxley de Prieur comes in. Lee Oxley de Prieur found herself living in her car after she and her husband had lost their jobs. And they were in desperate straits. But the church and certain people pulled together and helped them, and they got part-time work and they got food packages. And one day they decided, well, you know, we've got too much food for us to eat. It's going to spoil before we can get to it. So we'll look for another family that we can help. And in that process, they discovered how many white families there were in worse circumstances than they were. So Lee formed South African Family Relief Project. And over the years, she has fed, housed, helped, sent to doctors, sent to dentists, taken to hospital to have babies. Hundreds of thousands, literally, of white people in South Africa. So she looked at Munseyville and said, oh my Lord, nobody should live like this. So I helped her in the States raise the funds, and we put concrete floors in the houses in Munseyville. We built a school for the kids. We put up a retaining wall because the garbage from the black squatter camp, every time it rained, it flowed through Munseyville, through their houses. It was a disaster. We planted grass. We put in a children's playground. We set up a feeding system. We organized for medical people to come once a month. And we got this place on its feet. But we were not allowed to put up they didn't even want us to put floors in because they don't want them to be permanent structures, because at any time they can decide they want Munseyville back and the whites must go. So it was a very, very difficult path. We walked there between making it livable and not violating the law and getting these people thrown out because of that. So one night, the blacks in the nearby squatter camp decided that they were going to protest something and they were going to burn Munseyville down. And they came in their hundreds for the 300 people in Munseyville. By this time, we had organized porta potties for them so that each 2 houses had 1 porta potty, but which the municipality would only clean out once a month. So you have about 20 people using a porta potty that they won't clean. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we had organized all of this, and these were green plastic buildings with the porta potties. Well, these blacks came from Munseyville, and I got this hysterical phone call here in Texas from South Africa. They're attacking Munseyville, we need help. Anyway, we organized that a bunch of people would go through the veld at the back of Munseyville and rescue the children. Take them on a trek at midnight through this veld, 2 cars, and take them to a safe place. But the adults wouldn't leave because they knew if they left their houses, they wouldn't have a house to come back to, or they would have squatters in them. So that either way, they would not be able to come back to their homes. And they decided they're going to fight. 300 of them. And it wasn't 300 adults, so it was way less number. Anyway, the blacks came in and burnt everything on the outskirts. So the following morning, when a guy went to film it, the porta potties that we were renting were just puddles of green plastic on the ground. They'd burnt them all to pieces there. Anyway, a couple of days later, we sent the kids back, and it hasn't happened since. But the police refused to come in to help. It was too dangerous for them to come in to help. And it was a very, very, very touchy situation. It was hard. Anyway, so South African Family Relief Project then spread out, and they found at that time 480 of these places, which are not squatter camps. They're called informal settlements. The Muncieville is a squatter camp because it's designated that by the government. The others are not government. There are only 2 by the government. The rest are people who've banded together, a kind person who's given them a spare piece of land or rents it to them, which to me is unforgivable, but rents it to them so that they can build these little shanties out of cardboard boxes, pieces of wood, whatever they can find to keep the weather off. They don't have toilets, they don't have taps, they don't have washing facilities, they don't have electricity, they cook on fires, etc. She then discovered 480 more of these throughout the country, and conscripted volunteers who don't get paid a salary. They only get paid for the petrol they use traveling to collect donations, etc. And it's solely, there are 2 or 3 other recommended charities in South Africa that really do what they say they do. The money they collect goes where they say it goes. The others are charlatans who steal the photographs from the people who actually are doing it and use them for advertising purposes to raise money. And the money never gets seen by these people. Anyway, they have found more than 480, and every day they're finding new ones, because 58,000 by May this year had been laid off, not just white people. And saying, government figures are saying 1 million by the end of this month will have been laid off this year in South Africa. So the numbers are growing by the day. The squatter camps are beyond full. There is no place to put another cardboard box in the squatter camps to put anybody. So these people are living in the veld under a piece of tarpaulin or whatever, and it's a death sentence to be a family alone in the veld in South Africa. But there is no room for another family anywhere that we can find in South Africa. We don't have exact numbers, but we estimate 1 million people are in these camps, white people, of which more than half are children who are suffering terrible learning disabilities, speech difficulties, because they're not reaching the normal milestones that children should reach because they are starving hungry. The mothers, when they have their babies, a lot of them don't have any milk because they are starving. And so we need to give the children formula, but it can't be bought. It can't be donated. Well, there isn't money for it. It isn't donated by companies because they're not allowed to donate to whites. These children are battling, and their parents are feeding them cow's milk watered down, which is very bad for a developing child, but it's the only thing that they can do. So there is an enormous, enormous need for help from the outside world to help with these people, because the whites in South Africa do not have money.
Yeah.
They donate clothes, they donate furniture, they donate blankets, but they do not have money. And the ones that do are liberal idiots who have got their heads in the sand because they're living a good life, and they say this is not happening in our country. So if you have money, you don't recognize it and won't help. Now, the worst thing of all for these people is they have had a PayPal account for donations for 5 years. This last couple of months, just before Christmas, when donations come in thick and fast and are required the most, the ANC government froze their bank account froze their PayPal account because they are not BBBEE compliant. They're whites, not 80% blacks. So they got the required paperwork that they needed for PayPal to reopen their account because they had much needed funds in that account. The letter came from PayPal saying that because you are a high-risk area, we'd like to part company with you, and we are going to hold your funds for 180 days, and then you can have it back. So, now, at this time of year, where more and more people are on the streets, where we have every single year provided a Christmas meal for these people, a Christmas party and a small gift for the kids with jumping castles and Father Christmas, we are stuck, unable to touch those funds. And we are going to have to look these people in the face and say, there's no Christmas for you this year. Sorry.
Absolutely horrible.
But we found a way around it. So let me just sweeten this sourness a little bit. I can't tell you how we are doing it, but it's working for the moment until they slam that door in our face as well. So if you are moved to give $1, 50 cents, $5 to help these children have one day of joy in their absolutely miserable, hopeless, futureless lives, you can go to my website and donate there. Just put on it for the children. And we have a way that I can get the funds to them for the moment.
Yeah.
For the moment. I'm not guaranteeing how long it'll be before they catch up with us, but for the moment.
And we'll put your website's link in the description of this, just so the listener, they know where to go.
Yeah, but I can't guarantee how long, but I have sent 3 sets of money through to South Africa, and please God, it just lasts a little while longer that we can do this. So that is the situation for the whites in South Africa. They're either being murdered or they're living on a garbage heap. There doesn't seem to be a very happy medium for any of these people right now, and it's getting worse by the day. However, there is another ray of light at the end of this horrible tunnel, and it is a really good ray of light, so we're coming right back on ourselves to where I started with the Khoi people. I want to tell you that the Khoi people in 1994 took a deep sigh of relief and thought, thank you, Jesus, we are getting a voice in government. We are part of the previously disadvantaged people of this country, and we are finally going to have a say in our lives, only to be sadly disappointed. The government of South Africa refuses to acknowledge the Khoi as a people. If you're alive and you're a people and you speak and you function as a person and you're not a person, I don't know what you are. I don't know if you're a flower or an animal or a what, but you're not a person according to the ANC government. They refuse. So the Khoi king, and just by the way, many people will tell you that the Khoi have never had a king in their entire history. No, they don't. The guy, Cornelius, his title is Hoab, which is loosely translated so that Westerners understand what it is king. He does not consider himself king, but to translate it in a way that Westerners understand, Hoab means king. He tried by every possible means to get the internationally accredited rights for his people. And the ANC stubbornly refused. Now, when he went to the United Nations on behalf of the Khoi people, they said, my God, we didn't know any of you existed. We didn't know there was a Khoi tribe on the planet anymore. Of course you are the original peoples of South Africa. Of course you deserve this country of your own. Of course you deserve all the rights of the original peoples of any country. Go home and take them. So they went back to South Africa, spoke to the ANC, and the ANC kept making promises and promises and promises, and eventually said, it is unsustainable for the ANC to give you the rights of the original peoples because we cannot have a country within our country, which is total garbage, because inside of South Africa are two landlocked African countries, Swaziland and Lesotho, ruled by their own kings, by their own laws. So for them to say it's unsustainable is just a damned excuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So the white people of South Africa are trying desperately to find some way, as they always have, to have a place of their own where they can live their godly lives by the way that they want to live. Some brave souls went to the king and said to him, listen, if we join forces, at that stage there were approximately 4 million whites. I can't give you a number today because so many have left and so many have been murdered. I think it's more likely around 3 million, 3.2 million whites in South Africa, but nobody knows. I said, well, at that stage, there are 4 million whites, 4 million Khoi, and we don't know how many colors. Why don't we join forces? And you secede from South Africa because you have the international law on your side. And we will back you. And we will then have a country free and clear from this communist government. So they've been working underground for 2 years. And they did a damn fine job of it because nobody knew anything about it. And on the 24th of September of this year, the king stood in front of the castle in Cape Town and claimed the land for the Khoi and these other nations. The Boer nation, which is all the Afrikaans-speaking white people of South Africa. What they are calling Eurokaners are the English, Portuguese, Italian, Dutch, whatever other speaking white people of South Africa, the colored nation, and the Khoi nation. The 4 nations signed a treaty that they are doing this together and it will be their country. They've drawn up a constitution which is unbelievably wonderful. And secession happened. Now, if our TV station had not organized for one of the guys on his cell phone to live stream to us here in the, to Mel in Portugal to be broadcast in the States, the world would not have known about any of this. It was the only news event of the entire thing. Because the South African media is run by the government, they are hoping if they ignore it, it'll go away. And the rest of the world, well, South Africa doesn't exist, so we don't need to talk about it. However, they have spent this time crossing T's and dotting I's. They now have 5 countries willing to acknowledge the sovereign state of Good Hope as a country. That is all they need, is one country, but they have 5, to go to the UN and be acknowledged by the UN as a country. Now, no matter what you think of the UN, this is how it has to be done under international law. Yeah. So if we like it, don't like it, doesn't matter. We are doing this correctly. But none of the leaders of these countries want to come to South Africa because they are scared they won't be allowed to leave. If they come to acknowledge this, they may never be seen again. So the king has to go with his bodyguards to these countries, collect the letters, fly straight to the UN without touching South African land again, get acknowledged there, and then come back. At which time they will stop paying taxes to the ANC government. The taxes will pay for the country to be run, because the Cape is vastly rich, not in mineral wealth, but in agricultural wealth, which the king likes because he says you can't eat diamonds and gold. The taxes will then go straight into the coffers of the new. They don't want to call it the government. We don't have a word for it yet, so I'm using government because that's what people understand. And things happen. But these brave few who worked under the radar for 2 years to make this happen have lost their jobs, have no income, and have used every penny that they or their families will ever see in their life. They've taken loans on everything they can to make it get this far. We need $20,000 for the king to go get the letters and go to the UN in the scheme of saving 12 million people, the Khoi, the Coloureds, and the Whites. Is that a big amount of money?
No, not in
No, not at all.
retrospect.
You and I, it's astronomical. But in the scheme of creating a new country, it is a tiny amount of money. It is a drop in the ocean. But even my donors are sitting on the fence waiting to see what will happen. And nothing will happen if we can't raise this money. So we are trying to do a fundraiser here in Texas with Becky Williams helping me. We're trying, but it's the wrong time of year and all kinds of things. We want to do a fundraiser where we will do a hog barbecue, charge per plate. The king will be on the big screen from South Africa talking to the people. I'll give a discussion to the people. We'll raise the money that way, and maybe have some music. There are some really fine musicians who are willing to donate their time to this cause. So we're working on that at the moment, because I really would like to get this happening, because the EFF, who we've not talked about yet, led by Julius Malema, and I see we're running out of time.
Economic freedom fighters.
Yeah. They have threatened that if this law does not stop being held up in the courts by the 31st of December, they and Black Land First are coming for the land by any means necessary. This is a very real threat. Very, very real. Given the example of Zimbabwe and what has happened there, and Julius Malema being a student of Robert Mugabe and Fidel Castro and his son, it is a very real threat. And they outnumber 12 to 1, if not more, the whites in South Africa, and they live very spread out throughout the whole country. And they're threatening Uhuru after the 31st of December, which is their plan, to wipe out every white in South Africa within 48 hours, and which can be done. There'll be a mopping up operation afterwards, but it is perfectly possible to do that. So we need to get this show on the road now, get these people, and all good credit to Simon Roche and Statelanders. They are only saving the people who can afford a 4x4 and a trailer full of goods to go to these designated safe spaces.
Yeah.
They're not helping the poor. This plan, the sovereignty plan, has buses in place to go and bus in the people who can't get there. They are putting them up in tents. They will help restart them in business. They will. It's in place to help everybody, not just the rich. Look, Simon and I are good friends. We correspond. He sent me a wonderful email the other day. But their plan is not all-inclusive. It is only for the rich. And that's only a very top small percentage of people in South Africa. So there's a place for his plan, and there's a place for this plan. There's a place for both. Because they're going to need Statelanders if this plan does not, it falls off the rails. You know, we're going to need a Statelanders to save some of the people. But this can save all of the people and be a damn fine example for the rest of the world of what whites can do instead of being annihilated by the ravening hordes of blacks flowing into Europe, flowing into the UK, trying to come into the USA and kill us all because we're infidels. So it can be an example and a shining light for everybody if we can make it work.
Yeah.
So there is hope. It is not a deadly, hopeless situation. If the world would just wake up, look at it, and say, damn, these people are fine people. They are upstanding, hardworking, resilient, Christian people who deserve a place in the sun, and we'll help them. You know, I don't see where the problem lies with any of this. And that is why me, little old grey-haired granny me, incapacitated, limping along, has done so many shows on this subject. because we have to. We have a duty to save these people.
Yeah. And time is ticking away.
Time is short. The 31st of the month is how far off?
It's 25 days
or so.
Yeah. And these people are not going to ask you, do you speak Afrikaans? Do you speak English? Are you pro-ANC? Were you pro-apartheid? They're not going to ask you that.
They're just going to see who you are.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They stand up in court and say, we did this because they were white, and they get away with it. So that is the only reasoning you need, and they're not going to ask any other questions. And as for raping babies to cure AIDS, kidnapping babies for body parts for the witch doctors, that has to stop. And that alone should be reason for the world to be stepping in, never mind the rest of it.
Yeah.
So I've ranted for nearly 2 hours.
It's all good.
I apologize sincerely if I overstepped any boundaries here.
No, of course not.
But it's a very intricate story that you can't tell one part without telling the other.
Yeah.
I have not found a way to condense this story enough to bypass the cries of racist, apartheid lovers, oppressors, without telling that initial history and correcting the lies. The story falls apart. And so I've tried to condense it, but
it's all good. It's a big, complicated issue, and you can't look at it simplistically like people wish to.
No, you can't.
And it gives you such a better understanding of just where things are coming from as well, that most people don't often hear.
Yeah. I really have tried really hard to condense it, but and also I get carried away because it is my passion. I have a dog in this fight. They murdered my father, shot my brother, raped my sister, hijacked my daughter, robbed me blind 3 times, even taking the toilet rolls out of the house, stole my brand new car, ripped it to shreds. We found it down the road. They didn't even want the damn thing. They just wanted to tear it up. And as a single mother, that's pretty hard. You know, you proudly bring home this thing that you saved for only 3 days later to... So I have a dog in this fight. I have an enormous family still in South Africa. And I love the people of South Africa. I said recently, you can take the girl out of South Africa, but you can't take South Africa out the girl. And that is so the truth, because once you have lived in that country, it is burnt into your very bones. And my heart will always belong there. I love the States. I love the fact that I'm a citizen now. I love the fact that I don't have 8-foot walls in front of my house. I love the fact that I don't have to be scared every second of every day, terrified that I'm going to be attacked any minute. And what was that noise? And oh my God, they're coming in through the roof. As I lived for more than 50 years in Africa, I am very, very grateful for this country taking me in. Not willingly, mind you, but they did. But my heart will always belong in that country. And if people like me do not stand up and speak out, what is going to happen? If the world doesn't know, they can't help. So someone has to tell them.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's me. So that is my story, guys, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell it. And if I can ever be of any assistance getting South Africans on your show or helping you with spreading a word about anything, please let me know. I also have a radio show. So I can spread your word on mine if necessary.
No, yeah, thank you so much, Karin. I really appreciate everything you said. You know, even as myself, someone that understands the situation more so than probably 99% of Americans, even now I learned a lot, so I really appreciate it. And people do hear the stuff that we've done in South Africa, and it does help people. And we'd be interested in having more South Africans on talking about the issues. It's something that matters a lot to us.
I'll arrange that for you, especially Lee, because Lee is boots on the ground in these camps every day of her life. She is the one who has to decide who eats today and who doesn't. She is the one who has to look into that child's eyes and say, there's no food for you today.
Yeah.
She is the one who is the hero, the unsung hero in this saga, because there are, even in South Africa, a handful of people willing to do this. And you need to, I think it will strike home more from somebody who actually does and faces this every minute of every day.
Yeah, we'd definitely be interested in that.
Thank you both very, very much for this opportunity. And as I say, please carry on spreading the good word, because it's only due to people like yourselves that we are getting a listenership outside of South Africa.
And I guess with that, that's the midweek podcast we got for the week. Again, thank you, Karin, for coming on. And
thank you.
And with that, goodbye, listener. Till next time.
Bye.